with an estimate of 120 to 180,000. And
How
it could
much?
actually 120 to 180,000.
Oh my goodness.
And I could actually easily see it making over 200,000.
You're taking my breath away.
Well, it's been in my family for over 80 years. It was purchased somewhere around 1930 by my great-grandparents.
In Mexico or in the United States?
I believe it was purchased in Mexico.
Sometimes a masterpiece hides in the most ordinary place. This painting El Albañil spent years hanging behind a door, yet it turns out to be one of the rarest kinds of Diego Rivera work. An extremely early canvas, painted in 1904 when Rivera was only 18. Born in 1886, Rivera would later become one of the defining artists of 20th century Latin America, but this picture belongs to the moment before the murals, before the fame, when his voice was only beginning to form. Surviving works from this stage are exceptionally scarce, and El Albañil is regarded as one of the earliest Rivera paintings in the United States. What makes the painting so important is that it already points toward the Rivera the world would come to know. The subject is a laborer, and that choice matters. Even as a very young artist, Rivera was already looking toward the working people of Mexico, a theme that would later define his murals and public identity. The signature and date at lower right also fit this youthful period and the painting's long disappearance from view. Followed by its rediscovery and authentication decades later, gives it an added sense of mystery. Though it has been restored and lined, it remains in strong condition, and its history, rarity, and subject come together in a way that makes it feel less like a family picture and more like a missing early chapter in Rivera's story.
I would be putting a retail estimate on the piece of between $800,000 and $1 million.
Seriously?
Seriously.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Unbelievable. I did not expect that. I'm astounded. I really don't know what to say.
Behind a door?
Behind a door. It was behind the door.
Ernie Barnes was a former NFL player. He played for the Jets. But after football, he found art as being, I guess, part of his livelihood. And we all are familiar with Sugar Shack, and there's some other well-known pieces, but my father and Ernie made friends, and he was able to purchase this piece. And this actually sat on top of our fire mantle in our home in Santa Barbara, California.
A football painting by Ernie Barnes never really sits still. Even frozen on canvas, it seems to lunge, collide, and breathe with the pressure of the next second. Born in 1938 in Durham, North Carolina, Barnes first became known as a professional football player, before devoting himself fully to art, and that athletic past stayed in every line he painted. His elongated figures, compressed energy, and sense of motion came directly from lived experience, which is why his work feels less like sports illustration and more like physical memory. This painting, 4th and 1, dated 1971, belongs to that powerful language. The title comes straight from football, but the meaning reaches beyond the game itself. Barnes packs the players into a charged moment of impact, so the scene feels almost audible, as if the helmets and bodies are crashing together inside the frame. That tension is what gives the work its force. He was not painting a play as a statistic or a diagram. He was painting strain, rhythm, will, and survival under pressure. Its importance also deepens when placed beside Barnes's wider legacy. Works such as The Sugar Shack later became cultural landmarks, appearing with Marvin Gaye and reaching record prices at auction. But Fourth and One shows another core truth about Barnes. No one translated the inner feeling of movement into paint quite the way he did. This canvas holds both halves of his life at once, the former athlete and the mature artist, fused into one image of force and control.
The auction estimate at the time was $150,000. This piece wouldn't fall into that category just because it wasn't on Good Times for so many years and it wasn't on Marvin Gaye's album, but it's still a very valuable piece, I think. If I were to put a value on it for insurance purposes, I would make this around $650,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Awesome piece.
Amazing.
This was a wedding gift to my parents when they got married in 1940 in Chicago. A friend had this painting commissioned as a special gift to them. I got it when they moved out of Chicago and they were moving to a smaller house, and some of the items in the house I acquired. That was about more than 30 years ago.
Well, what you have here is a remarkable work by Joseph Henry Sharp, one of the founding figures of the Taos School. Sharp was born in Cincinnati and, despite losing his hearing at a young age, developed into a highly accomplished painter. He trained both in the United States and Europe before traveling to New Mexico in the late 19th century, where he became deeply engaged with the landscapes and Native American cultures of the region. This painting reflects his mature Taos period, depicting a quiet interaction between Native American figures set against an adobe environment. The composition is intimate yet grounded in ethnographic observation, a hallmark of Sharp's work. His handling of light is particularly noteworthy, with strong contrasts of sunlit surfaces and shadow that bring depth and atmosphere to the scene. Technically, the work is executed in oil on canvas with visible impasto, where thicker applications of paint create a textured surface. This adds a tactile quality and enhances the play of light across the painting. The fact that it has remained in excellent original condition, protected under glass, and free from damage such as tears or paint loss is especially significant in terms of value. Sharp's association with the Taos School, along with his role in documenting Native American life, has made his work highly sought after in the Western art market. Additionally, the provenance as a commissioned wedding gift from 1940 adds a personal historical layer, while its long absence from the market increases its desirability among collectors. This painting, if it were in a gallery, I would expect it to sell in the range of $400,000.
$400,000.
Yes.
It's a lot.
Yes. It's a very exciting painting.
Wow.
Collectors, they love to find things that have just come to market.
Thank you for your appraisal.
My husband was a student at Washington State University, and he had an art professor by the name of Clifford Still. Then as the years went by, he went on and got his doctorate and came back to Washington State. And the chairman of his department, they owned the painting, they gave it to us as a housewarming.
Some paintings capture a landscape. This one captures the exact moment an artist was about to change American art. Signed and dated 1937. This view of Grand Coulee belongs to the early career of Clifford Still when he was teaching at Washington State College and working from the raw land and labor of the Northwest. The dam was still under construction, and that sense of force scale and upheaval already fits the restless energy that would later define his name in abstract expressionism. What makes the painting so important is that it stands right on the edge of transformation. The forms are still readable as landscape and structure, yet Still is already pushing beyond description toward mass tension and emotional power. Scholars place his move from representation to abstraction between 1938 and 1942. Earlier than many of the artists later grouped with him, and works tied to Grand Coulee sit directly inside that turning point. That is why this canvas feels bigger than its subject. It is not only a painting of a dam in Washington, it is a rare early sign of an artist about to become one of the central voices of post-war American painting.
That painting that made 21 million was a new benchmark for him.
Yes.
So in fact, it may turn out that I'm being rather conservative when I say 500,000.
Well, but that gives us a basis of where to put our insurance.
I have to say, in all my years on the road show, it's probably the most exciting find I've had.
Oh, really?
And I'm absolutely thrilled that you brought it in today.
Well, thank you.
So thank you.
It's been in my husband's family for a very long time. It was passed down to his parents, and then after his parents passed away, it was passed on to us. And we've just had it hanging up in the house.
A winter scene like this can feel almost like a page torn from an old Canadian novel, and that is exactly why Cornelius Krieghoff became so beloved. Born in Amsterdam in 1815, he built his career in Canada and became one of the defining painters of mid-19th century Quebec life, especially through lively genre scenes filled with sleighs, families, snow, and daily activity. He was enormously popular in his own lifetime, and major Canadian institutions still describe his work as central to the visual imagination of early Canada. What gives this painting its appeal is the density of life inside it. The sled, the mother and child, and the busy winter movement all fit the qualities that made Krieghoff famous. His European background helped shape his taste for carefully observed genre painting. But in Canada, he turned that training toward a rougher, more local world, creating images that felt intimate, vivid, and distinctly national. That same popularity also explains why so many imitations and misattributions exist around his work, which makes strong family provenance especially meaningful here. A picture kept in one family since the 1940s, still in what appears to be its original frame, carries the kind of history collectors value because it supports authenticity as much as sentiment.
Given that, I would estimate the piece at auction between $200,000 and $300,000.
Oh my God! Oh my God!
It's a wonderful example of his work. For insurance and retail purposes, in excess of $350,000.
I can't believe it, Colleen. I just can't believe it. I can't believe it. I just can't believe it.
My parents lived in India in the 60s. My dad had gotten a Fulbright scholarship, and so they traveled there. The second time they went for him to do research between 68 and 70s, they had a friend who said, oh, I know this artist, Ram Kumar. And so they got introduced to him in a park in New Delhi, and he invited them back to his studio, and they bought this beautiful painting.
A painting first bought in a New Delhi park and carried home as a family treasure. Already feels touched by history before the eye even settles on the image. This work is by Ram Kumar, born in 1924, one of the first major Indian painters to move decisively from figurative art toward abstraction. After studying economics at St. Stephen's College, he went to Paris in 1949, where he studied with André Lotte and Fernand Léger. When he returned to India, he carried back modernist lessons from Europe, but he was determined that his painting should still remain deeply Indian in spirit. What makes this canvas especially compelling is that it belongs to the moment when Ram Kumar was fully mastering that shift. Dated 1967. It comes from the mature phase in which he began removing human figures, so viewers would stop focusing on individuals and instead enter the emotional structure of the whole painting. By this period, his work had moved toward abstract landscapes built from broken plains, muted architecture, and inward silence. Critics and galleries repeatedly describe this transition as central to his achievement because he turned abstraction into a language of memory, solitude, and place rather than pure form. That is why this painting feels larger than a keepsake from family life abroad. It is a mature Ram Kumar made at the point where post-colonial Indian painting was finding one of its clearest modern voices.
So realistically, for an insurance value, I would insure it at about $180,000.
Wow. Okay. Good to know. Yeah. I will definitely keep taking good care of it. It's really a keepsake of my family, so I look forward to being able to keep it on my wall.
I would probably frame it.
Okay.
A frame not just beautifies, but also protects.
Okay.
You brought a painting here that was exhibited in a museum, Leslie.
That's correct. It was on exhibit at the Carnegie Institute at the International Exhibition, and our grandmother purchased it in 1946.
Do you know who the artist is?
Yes, Rockwell Kent.
A frozen coastline can look silent, but in Rockwell Kent's hands, it becomes a statement about the world and the people living in it. The Land of Peace was completed in 1946, after Kent's Greenland years had already become central to his art. He was drawn again and again to severe places such as Greenland, Alaska, Tierra del Fuego, and the Alps, turning rock, ice, and distance into images of grandeur and reflection. This painting was shown in Carnegie's Painting in the United States, 1946, and what makes it especially rare is the letter Kent wrote after the sale explaining the scene, the people, and even the exact location in Greenland. What lifts the painting above a beautiful Arctic landscape is the way it reveals Kent himself. The blues, pinks, and reds give the scene a cold radiance while the tiny figures become the emotional center of the work. Kent was openly political and deeply pacifist after World War II, and in his letter he used the title The Land of Peace to contrast Greenland's quiet human world with the mass destruction of modern civilization. That is why this painting feels larger than its subject. It is not only a view of Greenland, but a portrait of Kent's ideals where landscape, people, and conscience are brought together in one of his strongest late works.
It's attractive, it's a subject matter, but then what puts it over the top is this letter. As such, at auction, if it didn't have the letter, I'd probably say about $100,000 to $150,000. With the letter, I'd put about $150,000 to $250,000 as an estimate.
Oh my, wow, that's amazing. That's wonderful. Thank you.
It's just a super thing.
I like the color.
The colors, yeah, the colors are nice.
My dad bought it in an auction back in the early 70s, and we've had it ever since.
And what do you know about the artist?
His name's W.H.D. Coroner, and he was grew up in Ohio, and his parents were from Germany. He was born in 1878, and he died in 1938.
A painting like this does not wait politely in the background. It looks as if a story is about to erupt out of it. The artist is W.H.D. Kerner, born in Germany in 1878 and brought to the United States as a child who rose from newspaper work at the Chicago Tribune to become one of the defining illustrators of the American West. After studying with Howard Pyle Kerner, developed the dramatic, carefully researched style that later made his name in magazines such as the Saturday Evening Post. In 1919, that magazine gave him Western subjects to illustrate, and from that point on, he threw himself into studying frontier history clothing weapons and regional detail with almost scholarly intensity. That background explains why this picture feels so convincing. Published in 1935, and likely painted in late 1934 or early 1935, it turns a moment of suspended action into pure drama. The hanging ristras of red chiles, the silver medallions on the belt, the serape kerchief hat and gun all show Kerner's obsession with getting the West right. Even the joined canvas, where two stretched pieces were combined into one larger support, adds to the sense that he expanded the scene until it held the full tension he wanted. This is not a casual Western image. It is an illustrator's stage set built with accuracy, color, and narrative force. That is what gives the painting its strength. It is not only a dramatic frontier scene, but a mature Kerner at work shaping the visual mythology of the American West with the confidence of an artist who had learned how to make history feel immediate.
Do you know how much your father paid for it when he bought it at auction?
I believe it was around $30,000.
Well, if you were to sell this in a retail gallery, I would expect the price to be around $150,000.
Really? Excellent.
Brought us a wonderful painting by an American artist named Willard Leroy Metcalf. And what do you know about the artist?
I know that he was around New York, an upper and lower Hudson Valley painter, and that he did a lot of work like this. I've seen some online. He did some work on Central Park, which looked not unlike this. And beyond that, I know he's dead.
A painting rescued from an attic can still carry the full force of an artist at his peak. This 1906 landscape by Willard Leroy Metcalf does exactly that. Born in Lowell, Massachusetts in 1858, Metcalf studied in Boston and later in Paris, then became one of the leading figures of American Impressionism and a member of the 10 American Painters. By the time this work was made, he had already moved beyond his earlier struggles and into the mature phase that brought him critical success. His summers at Old Lyme, Connecticut, beginning in 1905, produced some of his most admired landscapes, and the rolling hills and rocky ground here make that setting feel especially likely. What makes this painting so memorable is the way it shows Metcalf's renewed language after his crisis around 1901. The palette has turned softer and more pastel. The brushwork becomes feathery and broken, and the canvas itself is allowed to breathe through the paint. Instead of building a tightly described scene, he lets light air and surface do the work. That is why the landscape feels lyrical rather than merely topographical. Even found face down in an attic, it still carries the exact qualities collectors prize most in Metcalf: delicate color, atmospheric touch, and the sense that nature is being felt as much as seen.
By the way, what do you think it's worth? And they said, oh, well, about $3,000.
Well, a painting like this on the retail market would generally sell for $150,000.
Wow, that's pretty good for something that was free.
I think so.
Holy
I think
smokes.
so. Yeah, he's very collectible.
That's way over the top.
Yeah.
I enjoyed
Good.
it.
Great, thank you.
I was afraid you were going to say, well, nice 3,000, but it's actually worth 12 cents.
Oh, no.
My father's great aunt was Emma Bellows, and she was the wife of George Bellows. When my father was a young boy, they used to visit Emma in upstate New York at her home there. He used to go and see the paintings in the house, and apparently there was tons of them, and he was the only boy that used to be interested in these paintings. Emma was so intrigued that this young boy loved the art so much that she actually gifted this painting to my father.
A painting can hang in a family for years as a cherished object, then suddenly reveal itself as a missing piece of American art history. This one does exactly that. It is a landscape by George Bellows, born in 1882 in Columbus, Ohio. one of the major American artists of the early 20th century, trained in New York under Robert Henri after leaving Ohio State and even turning away from a promising baseball future. He married Emma Story in 1910, later spent much of his time in Woodstock, New York, and although his career was cut short by his death in 1925, he left behind one of the most powerful bodies of work in American art. What makes this painting so compelling is that it appears to belong to Bellows's 1913 landscape moment when he was exploring dramatic skies, thick paint, and bold color in subjects from Maine and Woodstock. Even though this panel is unsigned, the family provenance from Emma Bellows is exceptionally strong, and the heavy impasto, the dark blue-gray palette against vivid green, and the sense of weather just passing through all fit Bellows's work from that year. The Catskills story may be true, though the appraisers note that 1913 often points toward Maine, makes the subject especially intriguing.
The size, the date, and the subject matter. A gallery in New York would probably sell it for $150,000.
Oh my gosh. Really?
Yes, yes.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's really exciting.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome.
It's fantastic.
I can't believe it. I just can't believe it.
This is a portrait of my great-aunt Honor, which for my whole life growing up was leaning against the wall in the dining room. I now know that it was 1963 when they walked it into the house, and I'm sure my mother said, just set it there for now until we figure out what to do with it, and that turned into 50 years.
And it never moved.
Never moved.
Some portraits do more than preserve a face. They preserve a will. This 1912 portrait of Honor feels exactly like that a woman who seems to stand in front of us not as a passive sitter, but as a personality impossible to ignore. The artist is Charles Courtney Curran, born in Kentucky in 1861, trained in New York and later in Paris, and best known for luminous paintings of women outdoors in bright air and summer light. That is part of what makes this work so striking. It shows Curran at full maturity, but in a mode far more intimate and commanding than the sunlit scenes for which he is usually remembered. Honor is painted frontally with unusual confidence. Her fashionable dress, the peacock feather in her hand, and the Herter Brothers tapestry behind her turn the portrait into more than a likeness. They create a statement of taste, self-possession, and cultivated identity. The peacock feather adds a layer of symbolism tied to beauty and renewal, while the tapestry places her within the rich visual world of the aesthetic movement. That boldness suits what is known of her life, an entrepreneurial woman in Waco, deeply literary, and daring enough to travel to Ireland in 1907 to introduce herself to the novelist George Moore, who later wrote about her. That is why this painting is so alive. It is not simply a family portrait rescued from neglect. It is a finely staged image of a remarkable woman painted by a major American artist at his peak, where fashion intellect and character meet in one unforgettable presence.
Well, I would think that in a retail replacement insurance value, you would expect to see this at $125,000 to $150,000.
That's fantastic. Well, since she's always going to be part of the family, I guess I'll be calling my insurance agent Monday, first thing.
Good idea.
My mother was the supervisor of all public school physical education in San Antonio, Texas, and she was there from 1917 to 1924. And she lived next door to a family of artists. And she had told me that the whole family painted, In particular, she was very fond of Julian's paintings, and his name was Julian Onderdonk. Mother had a bow at that time.
A field of bluebonnets can seem familiar to almost any Texan, but in Julian Onderdonk's hands, it becomes light memory and identity. This small painting, dated 1920, belongs to the mature years of the San Antonio artist born in 1882, who first learned from his father, Robert Jenkins Onderdonk, and later studied in New York with William Merritt Chase. After returning to Texas in 1909, he became the painter most closely associated with bluebonnets and was later remembered as the father of Texas painting. What makes this work especially compelling is the way it gathers the qualities collectors value most in him. The bluebonnets are brought into the foreground, giving the scene immediate richness, while the warm pink sky adds a luminous atmosphere that sets this example apart. Painted on panel rather than canvas, it keeps an intimate, concentrated feeling, even as the landscape opens outward. That matters because Onderdonk died in 1922 at only 40, so a dated work from 1920 belongs to the final, fully realized phase of a brief but defining Texas career.
If it were in a gallery, and particularly maybe a gallery in Texas or where there are clients, and mostly Texans buy the bluebonnet pictures, a gallery would ask in the range of $125,000.
No!
Yes.
Oh my God.
It's amazing. Most people would not, who don't follow the scene wouldn't think that.
I'm not in the art scene,
Yeah.
so it's totally an unbelievable shock.
Well, I inherited this painting from my parents. My mother wanted to give my father a gift that he would really love. And he loved reading to his children books that had illustrations. And this is one of the illustrations. She knew how much he would love to get one of those, so she decided that she needed to make this a secret.
A painting chosen in secret, paid for $5 at a time from grocery money, already carries a story before the image even begins. This work is by Frank E. Schoonover, one of the major artists of the Brandywine School. The tradition shaped by Howard Pyle in Philadelphia. Born in 1877 and active well into the 20th century, Schoonover became famous for turning printed illustration into something vivid, dramatic, and unforgettable, especially in stories of adventure ships, history, and the American frontier. What makes this painting especially important is that it is not just a family treasure, but a published illustration tied to a specific book. It relates to Privateers of '76 by Ralph D. Payne. First published in 1923, and the handwritten note on the back connects it to Chapter 13 and to the scene described as "At a hail from the boat, he went to the rail." That gives the work a very precise place in the golden age of American illustration when artists like Schoonover gave novels their visual identity. The painting itself shows why he was so admired. The ships, the figure at the rail, and the feeling that something dangerous is about to happen all reveal his gift for suspense. This is not only an illustration. It is a full dramatic scene painted with the confidence of an artist who knew how to make history feel alive.
If this were in a gallery, I think that it would sell in the range of $125,000.
I know you're kidding me.
No, I'm not kidding. It's a wonderful, yes.
Really?
It's a wonderful painting. Wow. There's a big surge of interest in illustration.
Well, I love this painting.
Yeah.
I love this painting.
You've brought in a very interesting painting today, and it's by
Mr. Benton.
Thomas
Thomas
Hart
Benton.
Thomas Hart Benton. Your family had a nice association with the artist.
Basically, when the two families were newlyweds, my father and mother and Thomas and his wife.
This painting is the kind of surprise that reminds us Thomas Hart Benton was larger than his reputation. Most people remember him for sweeping scenes of American farms workers and regional life, yet this work shows a more experimental side. Born in 1889 in Missouri, Benton studied in Chicago and Paris, later became the leading figure of American regionalism, and is still regarded as one of the major American artists of the 20th century. What makes this piece so compelling is the contrast between subject and style. Though the family always knew it simply as a study, it carries the upward movement, brilliant color, and thick impasto that give Benton's best works their force. It was painted on tin, a support he is known to have used for its smooth surface, which allowed him to build the paint up with unusual texture and dimension. The result feels part still life, part abstraction, and almost sculptural in effect. Since the family received it in the early 1950s, it likely belongs to Benton's later career, when his palette had become especially vivid and confident. That is why this painting feels so unusual. It is not the Benton most viewers expect, but it reveals how broad his imagination really was.
I think that if this were in a gallery, it could be sold in the range of $125,000.
Okay. Wow. I have to tell you, maybe I got to get a couch here. But wow, that's very interesting.
I moved here from Philadelphia, where I grew up, and this painting came into my family through my grandparents. My grandfather was a surgeon in Philadelphia, and one of his patients was named Fern Coppage, and I believe that this painting was something that Fern gave my grandfather in gratitude for the surgery that he performed on her.
Sometimes a painting enters a family not through a gallery or a collector, but through gratitude. This landscape by Fern Coppage, known in the family as Goat Hill, carries exactly that kind of story. Born in 1883 in Illinois, Coppage studied in Chicago, later worked in Pennsylvania with Daniel Garber, and became one of the best-known painters associated with Pennsylvania Impressionism. After arriving in New Hope in 1917 and settling in Lumberville in 1920, she built a reputation for bold color, strong design, and an independent spirit that set her apart among the women artists of her time. What makes this painting especially compelling is its scale and composition. Coppage usually worked in smaller formats, but this larger canvas gives her space to lead the eye inward with the road across the bridge and up the hill. That structure gives the scene both movement and calm. At the same time, her color keeps the landscape alive, not stiff or overly described, but full of atmosphere and feeling. She was known for painting outdoors in difficult conditions and for trusting color as much as detail, and that confidence is easy to feel here. Rather than simply recording a place near Conestoga, Pennsylvania, she turns it into something more lyrical and more memorable. This is not just a family painting. It is a particularly strong Coppage, and that is what makes it so special.
I think it's a particularly good example. At auction, I'd feel very comfortable with an estimate of 120 to 180,000. And I could actually 120 to 180,000.
Oh my goodness!
And I could actually easily see it making over 200,000.
Oh, you're taking my breath away.
You seem surprised.
I'm stunned. I'm totally stunned.
You chose well.
Oh, thank you so much.
Not at all.
Thank you so much.
So I brought a painting that belonged to my grandparents. It hung in their home, it hung in my parents' home, and it's been hanging in my living room for the past 20 years. I know it's Fern Coppage, and Lehigh Valley, Delaware Gap area is the scenes that inspired it. The painting had been purchased by my grandparents, my father's father. We believe they purchased it at an auction or fundraiser for Lafayette College.
Winter was never just weather for Fern Coppage. In her hands, it became color-feeling and light. This painting, December Mist, belongs to the early Pennsylvania period of one of the best-known Pennsylvania Impressionists. Coppage studied at the Art Institute of Chicago, the Art Students League, with William Merritt Chase, and the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, with Daniel Garber. She first came to Pennsylvania in 1917 and settled in Lumberville in 1920, becoming closely tied to Bucks County and the New Hope Circle. She was also part of the Philadelphia 10, the Women Artists group that supported serious professional work at a time when the art world was still heavily male. What makes this picture so compelling is that it gathers almost everything collectors hope to find in Coppage. The subject is a snowy Pennsylvania landscape, likely painted around 1920 when she was embracing the region that would define her career. Even through aged varnish, the painting still shows her gift for seeing snow not as white, but as shifting blues-violets and reflected light. That sensitivity to color, combined with her commitment to painting en plein air in winter, is exactly what made her snow scenes so admired. Accounts of her life note that she went outdoors in severe cold, sometimes in a bearskin coat, to paint directly from nature.
It was intrepid. Her market has been doing very well recently.
Oh.
I would insure this for no less than $120,000.
Oh, really? Wow. Wow. Okay. That's worth insuring. I was not expecting that. Thank you, Grandpa.
I got them through my father-in-law. My wife and I inherited them. When he was 8 years old, he went to the Philippines with his family. They were mining engineers.
And approximately when would that have been?
This would have been mid-30s.
Okay.
The war came along, and all the civilians were taken into an internment camp, Santo Tomas, in Manila.
What first feels like a family keepsake from the Philippines soon reveals itself as part of a much larger cultural story. These two oil paintings are by Fernando Amorsolo, born in 1892. The artist later honored as the first national artist of the Philippines for painting. Across the first half of the 20th century, Amorsolo became famous for turning rural labor village life and ordinary people into glowing images of national identity. His light is what viewers remember first. It softens the land, warms the figures, and gives even simple daily work a sense of dignity and calm. The smaller painting, showing a laundress, belongs to the kind of genre subject he returned to again and again. The larger work, with figures gathering the harvest, reflects the agricultural scenes that made him beloved across generations. These were not random choices. Amorsolo built his reputation on scenes like these because they captured an ideal vision of the Philippines not through drama or hardship, but through sunlight, rhythm, and quiet beauty. That is why his paintings traveled so widely after the war, especially with Americans who brought them home, and why Filipino collectors later began reclaiming them so strongly. Together, these two works preserve the mood that made Amorsolo unforgettable, a countryside full of labor light and memory.
Okay. For both of the paintings together, I would suggest a conservative auction estimate of $120,000 to $180,000.
That's a bit more than I was expecting.
The smaller example, I would estimate in the range of $40,000 to $60,000.
I am very surprised.
The larger harvest scene. I would put an auction estimate of $80,000 to $120,000.
Okay.
My dad's sister married a grandson of the Blatz family in Milwaukee, and she had this painting and another one in her apartment and in her house for a long time. And I always loved this. I like horses. And when she broke up housekeeping, she gave this to me, and so I've had this for maybe 20 years.
A painting like this does not simply show a game. It throws us straight into the speed dust and danger of the Caucasus. The artist is Franz Roubaud, the Russian painter of French family background, born in Odessa in 1856, trained in Munich, and later called back to Russia in 1885 to paint the history and life of the Caucasus. That background matters because this subject sits right at the center of the world that made his reputation. What gives the painting its force is the action itself. The scene shows the mounted contest now widely known as buzkashi, in which riders struggle to seize and carry off an animal carcass, often a goat. Roubaud was especially gifted at this kind of subject because he knew how to turn horses' bodies and movement into pure momentum. Instead of a calm landscape, he builds a charging composition full of pressure and pursuit, where the energy of the riders becomes the real subject. Bought in the Munich area around 1910 and still praised for its original frame unlined canvas and strong condition, the work feels like a jewel from the period when Roubaud's Caucasian images were at their most vivid.
Which is soft in some areas, but not soft in Russian art, would be about $100,000.
Oh my God, I can't believe that.
$100,000.
Oh, wow. I mean, that's a lot. That's...
They're still lifes by an artist named John F. Francis, dated 1865.
Well, he is really considered one of America's foremost 19th century still life painters.
Some paintings are meant to impress with abundance. John F. Francis did something more subtle. He made still life feel intimate, exact, and quietly human. These two paintings, both dated 1865, come from the mature period of one of America's leading 19th century still life painters. Francis began as an itinerant portrait painter in the Middle Atlantic region and turned more fully to still life in the 1850s, bringing with him a sharp eye for realism and scale. That is exactly what gives this pair its charm. One painting centers on a dessert arrangement, the other on fruit, and together they show the range within Francis's tabletop world. He liked to paint objects close to their natural size, and he did not idealize them. The apples keep their dents, the fruit shows dark spots, and the surfaces feel observed rather than polished into perfection. These works are oil on panel, which is especially fitting for smaller pictures like these, even though Francis more often used canvas for larger still lifes. What makes them especially important is not only the artist, but the fact that they remain a pair still in their original frames and in such strong condition. That combination is rare. Seen together, they do not feel like simple decorative pictures. They feel like a complete statement of Francis at his best, where realism, restraint, and everyday beauty come together with remarkable confidence.
If we found these in a gallery for sale, I think a gallery would ask $100,000 for the pair.
Fun. That's more than I thought it would be.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
This painting is a Frederick Church sketch Frederick Church was a relative of mine. He married my great aunt. She lived in his estate up in New York on the Hudson, Olana. When I was a little girl, I went to Olana with my mother, and she gave this sketch to my mother.
A small oil sketch can sometimes hold the beginning of an entire vision. This one, by Frederick Edwin Church, does exactly that. Church, one of the great painters of the Hudson River School, traveled through Europe and the Middle East in 1867, and those journeys later shaped the Persian-inspired world of Olana, the house he began building above the Hudson in 1870. That connection makes this work especially meaningful because it comes from the very period when travel architecture and painting are all feeding one another in his imagination. What makes the sketch so compelling is its contrast between size and control. Though small and painted on what appears to be paperboard, it has the exact precision collectors admire in Church's oil studies. The subject was long thought to be Persia, but the roadshow follow-up noted that viewers later identified the landscape as the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon, which fits Church's documented Middle Eastern travels. Rather than a finished panorama, this feels like a concentrated field note by a master, where terrain, atmosphere, and light are distilled into a tightly observed image.
It is a bit of an unusual subject matter for him. We think that at auction, a conservative estimate would be $100,000 to $150,000.
Wow. Oh. It was in the basement of my mother's house for a long time.
I brought here a painting that was in the family by Angel Boteo. I think the first photo that I noticed with this painting was about a year after I was born. So at least 62, we'd already moved to Puerto Rico, and this was it hanging on our wall. My parents and him and his wife, Christian Boteo, were dear friends. We would hang out on weekends together.
This painting feels less like an object on a wall and more like the memory of a friendship made visible. The artist is Angel Boteo, born in 1913 in Spain, who later moved through France, the Spanish Civil War, the Caribbean, and finally Puerto Rico, where he became one of the island's most recognizable painters. After periods in Santo Domingo and Haiti, he settled in Puerto Rico in 1953 and opened a gallery at the Caribe Hilton, helping build the public image that made his work so widely known. What makes this panel so striking is the way it gathers everything viewers love in Botello. The subject is religious, centered on the three kings, the Virgin Mary, and the Christ child, but the feeling is not distant or formal. Instead, the figures are built from angular faces, dark modeling, and glowing Caribbean color, the visual language that became his signature. That combination fits Botello's larger achievement. He absorbed European modernism, especially Fauvist, and post-impressionist color, then transformed it through the light people and devotional culture of the Caribbean. The result is not just a sacred image, but a celebration of place belief and community in one of Botello's most ambitious formats.
Because so many of his works do not have multiple figures and are not this grand, this artwork, if you were going to insure it, I would insure it for $100,000.
Thank you. Thank you. I didn't think it was that much.
My grandmother was an artist, and she collected all kinds of things. I don't think there was a junk shop that she hadn't explored. And then my mother inherited it, and then when my mother passed, I got it. I know it's Johnson, and he was a black painter. I don't know much more than that.
What seems at first like a painting forgotten in a family collection is actually a window into the early rise of William H. Johnson. born in Florence, South Carolina in 1901. Johnson worked his way to New York, studied at the National Academy of Design, and then traveled to France, where his style opened to modern European influence. This canvas belongs to that early French period around 1928 when he was painting in Cagnes-sur-Mer and shaping the artistic voice that would later make him one of the most important African-American painters of the 20th century. What makes this work so compelling is that it shows a side of Johnson many viewers do not expect. Before the bold, simplified, folk-inspired paintings of his later years, he was painting village views in southern France with a more expressive, emotionally charged surface. Here, the land and houses seem to press forward in strong, restless forms, reflecting the kind of modern energy often linked to artists such as Chaim Soutine. That is why the picture feels alive. It is not describing a place quietly. It is translating what the place felt like through color structure and movement. That is what gives this painting its importance. It is not only an early Johnson. It is a glimpse of the moment when a young artist still searching was turning European experience into a language that would soon become entirely his own.
I think this painting would sell for $80,000 to $120,000.
That's incredible. Wow. I had no idea, and that's why I brought it.
If you were to have it taken care of, you would spend a few $1,000s to have it taken care of, and then the value would increase substantially. It would probably be worth between $150,000 and $175,000.
Okay. Family heirloom. I inherited it from my great aunt.
And it has some information on the back about the location, which is South Texas. Do you have a connection with, is the family
No, we're
connected?
from California.
A rider disappearing into the distance can tell you as much about Texas as a whole field of bluebonnets. This landscape by Julian Onderdonk does exactly that. Born in San Antonio in 1882, trained first by his father. Robert Jenkins Onderdonk, then later in New York, under William Merritt Chase Onderdonk, brought American Impressionist ideas back to Texas and turned them into a visual language of heat dust, distance, and light. After returning to San Antonio in 1909, he became the painter most closely identified with the Texas landscape and was later remembered as the father of Texas painting. What makes this painting so appealing is that it shows him outside his most famous bluebonnet scenes while keeping everything collectors love in his work. The setting is South Texas, and the composition depends less on detail than on atmosphere. The small rider on the road gives the picture a quiet pull, while the loose brushwork keeps the land airy and impressionistic rather than sharply described. That balance is central to Onderdonk's art. He was trained in the language of plein air painting, but he used it to capture the specific mood of Texas. This is why the picture feels larger than a simple landscape. It is a lyrical Texas scene by the artist who gave that landscape its most enduring painted identity.
He's a very important artist in Texas. I think that if you were selling this in a gallery, it might bring as much as $75,000 or even as much as $100,000 in Texas. So I think you have a very nice picture.
Thank goodness. Thank you. Thank goodness.
This was my grandmother's, and it was passed on to me because I was the only granddaughter out of this set of children, of three, all boys, only girl, so it became mine. So I was the lucky one.
And where did your grandmother get it?
My grandmother bought this in 1935 in San Antonio. She was walking by a print/frame shop, and this was in the window, and she paid $100 for it. So I've seen this painting all of my life and absolutely loved it.
Sometimes the best family heirlooms begin with a simple moment of recognition. This Texas landscape by Porfirio Salinas carries that kind of story. Born near Bastrop, Texas in 1910, Salinas became one of the painters most closely associated with the hill country, especially its bluebonnets, changing seasons, and quiet roads. He was largely self-taught, though as a teenager, he worked with Robert William Wood, learning the craft before stepping out on his own. What gives this painting its charm is its early date. Painted around 1935, it comes from a time when Salinas was still young, but already deeply tuned to the land he would spend a lifetime painting. The scene is rugged rather than decorative, and that matters. Instead of turning Texas into a postcard, he gives it texture, season, and mood. Later, that same sensitivity made him a favorite of Lyndon B. Johnson, who collected his work and displayed it prominently, helping raise Salinas's profile far beyond Texas. This is why the painting feels more than regional. It is an early Salinas already showing the eye that would make him one of Texas's most cherished landscape painters.
I think if this were to be sold at a retail gallery today, it might bring as much as $45,000.
Oh my goodness.
So a little bit more than the $100
My
that you're...
grandmother would be so happy. She really would. I'm embarrassed. But I had no idea. Oh, thank you so much.
Well, I am thrilled that you brought it in today. It was so lovely to see it.
It came from my husband's family. They went to New Mexico in the 1920s. I do believe that's when they bought that in Tahoe in New Mexico, either directly from the artist or from his gallery.
An image of a native girl can seem quiet at first, but in Leon Gaspar's hands, it becomes something far more layered: travel exile and the romance of Taos, all meeting in one small painting. Gaspar was born in the Russian Empire, most likely in 1883, later studied in Paris, and eventually settled in Taos, New Mexico, where he became associated with the Taos art world, while still remaining unusual within it. Unlike many Taos painters who focused mainly on local landscape, Gaspar brought with him a broader fascination with costume ritual and peoples from many regions he had known or imagined through travel. What makes this work especially appealing is that it belongs to that early Taos moment. Signed and dated 1919, it shows a Native American girl, but it does not feel stiff or ethnographic. Instead, the visible brushwork gives the surface a freshness that feels surprisingly modern for the time. That painterly handling matters because Gaspar's work is often admired for combining strong color and pattern with a vivid sense of personality. The result is both charming and serious, a portrait that carries warmth, style, and the cosmopolitan eye of an artist who arrived in Taos from a much wider world. This is why the painting feels more than decorative. It is an early Gaspar made just as he was establishing himself in Taos, and it already shows the elegance and distinctive vision that would define his career.
I think if it were to be offered now in a retail gallery, the asking price might be as much as $75,000.
What?
Yes.
Seriously?
Seriously.
Oh my gosh. Now that is a surprise.
Good.
That is a wonderful surprise. Wow. I like. That's excellent. Seriously?
Yes.
She will be more special now than she was before. Lovely.
John was a pilot for Pan Am out of New York in the 50s, and he loved art, and he loved to meet his people that were on the planes. In those days, they could.
Wow.
So he came out and looked at the roster and saw the name of Norman Rockwell, and he was delighted with his wife making a trip around the world.
And what year was this?
55,
55.
I think. Yeah. They had a nice visit. Norman Rockwell was a very homey man, very easy to talk to. John really enjoyed him. And when Mr. Rockwell got called into the office of Pan Am later to do a series of paintings.
A portrait like this carries more than a likeness. It carries the glamour of mid-century air travel and the unmistakable eye of Norman Rockwell. By 1955, Rockwell was already America's best-known illustrator, born in 1894, and celebrated for his long run of Saturday Evening Post covers and for his ability to turn ordinary people into national types. Pan Am was one of the major companies that used that gift in advertising, and period records confirm Rockwell's work for the airline in the mid-1950s. What makes this painting so compelling is that the sitter was not an invented model, but a real Pan Am captain chosen by Rockwell himself after meeting him in flight. That matters because Rockwell's real strength was never just resemblance. It was his ability to find a face that could carry an entire American mood. Here, the pilot becomes more than a man in uniform. He becomes a symbol of confidence, ease, and the romance of global travel at the height of the Pan Am era. The canvas still appears structurally sound, though age and smoke have yellowed the surface, so a careful cleaning would likely restore much of its original freshness.
That have made record prices. Generally in his work, the ones that do realize the most sums are more fully developed paintings. I would say that if this were to be sold in a gallery at the present time, it would sell in the range of $75,000.
Oh, goodness. I'm so happy.
My mother and her two sisters were each given one of 3 paintings back in the mid-60s, I believe. I think the two sisters sold theirs quite quickly after they received them, and my mother was offered $500 for the third one of the 3, and she turned it down. She gave it to me about 20 years ago. I've kind of had it in different storage areas, never put it up for display, never had it in a frame or anything.
A painting left unframed and almost forgotten can still hold the full glow of the Southwest. This one does exactly that. It is William Robinson Lee's Drying Corn, dated 1917. A work from the period when Lee had already turned away from his earlier dissatisfaction in New York and found his true artistic world in the American Southwest. Born in 1866 in West Virginia, trained in Baltimore and Europe. Lee first traveled west in 1906 and then returned again and again, building the body of work that would make him one of the most respected painters of native life and Western subjects in American art. What gives this picture its charm is the quiet dignity of its subject. The sitter is identified as a Hopi maiden, and the painting's title on the reverse, Drying Corn, anchors it in the daily life of northern Arizona rather than in a romantic fantasy of the West. Lee was known for his brilliant use of sunlight and color, and those qualities matter here. The scene feels still warm and closely observed, while the board support keeps the image intimate and immediate. His native subjects were central to the Western paintings that made his reputation, especially after the Santa Fe Railroad commissions helped establish him as a major interpreter of the Southwest. That is why this small work feels larger than its size. It is not simply a portrait of one young woman. It is a refined Lee from a strong period carrying the color light and attentive respect that define his best Southwestern pictures.
If this were in a retail gallery, I think the asking price could be as much as $75,000. This is really a little gem.
Wow.
So I would say to you, it's time to put it in a frame.
Okay, I think so. Wow. It's a lot more than we thought for. That's absolutely amazing.
This has been in my husband's family for many years. It was in the possession of my mother-in-law. It was hanging in the house where my husband grew up.
Oh, how neat.
I don't know when she acquired it, but the linkage is that her grandmother was the relationship to the wife of Schreevogel.
A horse alone in a painting can sometimes carry the whole mythology of the American West. That is what happens here. The artist is Charles Schreevogel, one of the most important painters of frontier life in the early 20th century. Born in New York in 1861 to German immigrant parents, he trained in Munich after working in practical trades like pipe carving, goldsmithing, and lithography. He became fascinated with the West long before he could afford to travel there first, studying it through Buffalo Bill's Wild West shows, then finally making trips to Colorado and Arizona in the 1890s. His art was rare, highly finished, and so admired that after Frederick Remington's death in 1909, Schreevogel was widely seen as the leading painter of Western action. What makes this painting so striking is its simplicity. Instead of cavalry drama or a crowded frontier scene, it focuses on a single workhorse. That restraint gives the subject unexpected weight. The horse stands not just as an animal, but as a symbol of labor endurance and the hard physical world that made the frontier possible. Schreevogel painted relatively few oils, which is one reason collectors value them so highly. And the fact that this work has remained in the same family since it was painted only deepens its importance. It feels less like a decorative Western picture and more like a distilled statement of strength, patience, and the quiet heroism that runs through the best art of the American West.
In terms of the amount of work that he did, particularly in painting. His work is highly desirable among Western collectors. And a painting like this, if it were in a gallery, would most likely sell in the range of $75,000.
This is wonderful. I can't tell you how overwhelmed I am with this. It's really wonderful.
I'm a lifelong thrifter, and I thrift when I'm stressed, and I thrift everything. I'm an occupational therapist in a level 1 trauma hospital.
Wow.
And work on rehabbing people with catastrophic injuries. And one Saturday morning, it had been kind of a stressful day at work. I was at Goodwill first thing in the morning, and I kind of saw in the painting section, I noticed there was a little plaque here, which is like what you would see in a museum. So I thought it looked like a real painting, and I picked it up and put it in my cart.
A painting lifted from a thrift store for $15.99 sounds like the start of a lucky story. In this case, it becomes the rediscovery of a real work. By Le Pho, one of the most important painters of modern Vietnamese art. Born in 1907 in French Indochina, Le Pho studied at the École des Beaux-Arts de l'Indochine in Hanoi and later at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. He eventually settled in France, where his career evolved through several distinct phases before he died in Paris in 2001. What makes this painting especially interesting is that it belongs to his later Findlay period. The phase associated with dealer Wally Findlay, who helped bring Le Pho's work to a wide American audience from the 1960s onward. The title, Cueillette des Pommes Cannelle, means cinnamon apple picking, and the work reflects the softer, more decorative, more atmospheric language of his mature years. The appraiser identified it as oil on board, signed at lower right, and noted that the frame is original to the way Findlay Galleries presented his paintings. That detail matters because the gallery itself played a major role in shaping how collectors came to recognize and desire this phase of Le Pho's art. What gives the piece its real charm, though, is the contrast between where it was found and what it actually is. Behind the thrift store surprise stands a painter who fused Vietnamese sensibility Paris training and market-era elegance into a style that remains instantly recognizable. It is not just a lucky find. It is a mature LeFaux carrying beauty history and an almost unbelievable second life.
Works of this scale generally sell in the 60 to 80,000 range at auction.
Wow. Did you hear that? That's a lot. Wow. What am I going to do with it?
It's a significant find.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you.
My husband and I inherited it from his father in 2014-2015. My father-in-law received it as a graduation gift from his grandmother in 1959 when he graduated from UNC. His grandmother, or my husband's great-grandmother, vacationed where the original artist lived, and apparently she saw it in his home and purchased it from him.
A portrait that comes with a goodbye note already feels different before the eye has fully settled on the paint. This one carries exactly that kind of presence. Painted by Joseph Henry Sharp, it belongs to the world of the Taos Society of Artists, the group he helped found after first visiting Taos in 1893. Born in 1859 in Ohio and trained in Europe, Sharp became one of the most important painters of native portraiture in the American West, so closely tied to Taos that he is often called its spiritual father. The sitter is identified as Chief Little Wolf, the renowned Northern Cheyenne leader associated with the fighting against Custer in 1876 and remembered as a major tactician and chief. Sharp painted Little Wolf more than once, and museum records confirm that these portraits held a special place in his work. That matters here because this canvas appears to belong to the earlier phase of those encounters around 1898 to 1899, when Sharp was deeply engaged with Plains subjects. What stays with me most is the tone of the portrait itself. Little Wolf is not turned into spectacle. He is presented with stillness, gravity, and dignity. The farewell note on the back only deepens that feeling, suggesting this was a painting Sharp had lived with and valued personally. It feels less like an object and more like a lasting act of respect.
It's a very good example of this period. I would say the auction estimate for a piece like this would probably be $50,000 to $70,000.
Okay.
And if it were to be in a retail environment, it would be priced at about $85,000.
Wow. That was more than I thought. Wow.
We got it in Massachusetts in late 70s. My husband spotted it at an antique shop.
Do you recall what you paid for it?
I think it was somewhere around $1,200, but honest to goodness, I don't remember.
A deck swept by waves can tell the whole story of a painter. In Armin Carl Hansen's hands, the sea was never background. It was the main drama. Born in San Francisco in 1886, Hansen first learned from his father, the Western painter Hermann Wendelborg Hansen, then studied art in California and Germany before spending several years as a deckhand on Norwegian trawlers. When he returned to California in 1912 and settled in Monterey in 1913, he turned that hard-earned knowledge of wind labor and water into the subject that made him famous. That background explains why this painting feels so immediate. Likely from the late 1910s or early 1920s, it shows sailors bracing themselves on deck as storm water crashes over the boat. The brushwork is impressionistic but the mood is not soft. Hansen uses a dark, dramatic palette to make the sea feel heavy and dangerous, while the figures remain solid enough to show his first-hand understanding of maritime life. He painted Western subjects too, but his marine scenes have always felt the most personal, because they were built from experience rather than imagination.
It's an impressionist brushstroke, but a kind of interesting, dark and dramatic palette. A painting like this should sell at auction for between $50,000 and $75,000.
Oh my. Oh my.
My mother bought it because of the frame. She thought it had a lovely frame. She bought it from a gallery in Knoxville, Tennessee, and that's all I know.
What first caught the eye was the frame, but the real treasure was the view inside it. This painting is by Frank Henry Shapley. Born in Boston in 1842, a landscape painter best known for white mountain scenes, who also worked extensively in St. Augustine, Florida, after the Civil War and after study in Paris. The place shown here is not Charleston Harbor, but Fort Marion, now again called Castillo de San Marcos, the Spanish fort in St. Augustine, whose stone construction began in 1672. What gives the picture its appeal is the way Shapley softens a military landmark into something atmospheric and elegant. The fort's heavy geometry sits against open water and coastal light, so the scene feels both historic and calm. That balance fits Shapley well. He was admired for close observation, but he also knew how to turn architecture and harbor air into a lyrical landscape rather than a dry record. The work is oil on canvas, and the painting itself carries the value here, not the frame. The frame is a molded composition frame with metal leaf rather than carved gilding, a type known to deteriorate over time and one that adds little to the picture's worth. This is why the painting feels more important than a hallway decoration. It is a refined Shapley view of old St. Augustine, where history shoreline light and a painter's disciplined eye come together beautifully.
I think an appropriate value would be $50,000 to $70,000.
Really? I'm surprised, shocked. I may take it off the wall in the hall and put it a little out where I can see it more.
What can you tell me about this wonderful Rusty Herline?
Well, I know my grandfather got it commissioned back in 1964. They were living in Fairbanks and they took the family on a drive down to Esther, where Rusty lived and worked. My dad was about 10 or 11 back then. He remembers faintly, but my grandfather went in a separate room with Rusty and discussed what kind of painting he wanted, and then they left, and about 3 months later, they had this nice painting delivered to their home.
There are paintings that do more than show Alaska. They preserve the feeling of standing inside it. This work was painted by Magnus Kolkord Herlin, an artist who devoted much of his life to capturing the frontier spirit of the North. Born in 1895, he first came to Alaska in the early 20th century, and later made it the center of his artistic world. Over time, he became known for images of sled dogs, trappers, winter camps, and the northern wilderness, always painted with a deep sense of atmosphere rather than simple description. What makes this 1964 painting so memorable is its quiet power. The snow, the musher, and the northern lights are all familiar Alaskan elements, yet Herlin arranges them with unusual restraint. The blue-toned palette keeps the scene calm and spacious, while the solitary figure seems almost absorbed into the vast stillness around him. That choice matters because it allows the northern lights to feel less like decoration and more like a living presence above the land. Herlin was especially admired for this ability to paint not only what Alaska looked like, but what Alaska felt like. That is why this work feels larger than a family keepsake. It is a mature Herlin carrying the silence mystery and frontier poetry that made his vision of.
Did you know that the Anchorage Museum has a piece quite similar to this?
Oh, no, I didn't know that.
Yeah, they have a number of his paintings. I would give it an auction estimate of between $40,000 and $60,000.
Wow, that's more than I thought.
And for insurance, I think maybe around $75,000.
Okay. Wow, was not expecting that. That's quite astounding. Don't plan on selling it. It's a family piece.
Some winter paintings show snow. Aldro Hibbard made snow feel cold, bright, and alive. This work carries the full spirit of a New England painter who was deeply tied to Boston. Aldro Hibbard was born in Falmouth in 1886, grew up in Dorchester, studied at the Boston Museum School, later taught at Boston University, and became one of the founding figures of the Rockport Art Association. He is best remembered for his post-impressionist winter landscapes, especially the Vermont scenes that made his name. That is exactly why this painting feels so strong. Although Hibbard was closely linked to Massachusetts, he often spent his winters in Vermont, and this scene belongs to the part of his career when he was fully in command of that subject. The snow is not treated as flat, white paint. It shifts through blues, greens, and light, creating the crisp atmosphere that critics admired in his work. A contemporary Boston Globe comment praised him by saying that other artists painted snow as white paint, but Hibbard painted snow so that it truly looked like snow. What makes the picture even more meaningful is its story. Found in the attic of Boston's Mather School, and later hung in the Parkman House, the mayor's official residence, it feels like a painting that came home to the city that shaped its maker. In the end, this is more than a beautiful winter landscape. It is a classic Hibbard rooted in New England, rich in color, and painted at the high point of his mature career.
For insurance, I would think that we would value the piece at between $45,000 and $50,000.
Wow.
Yes.
$45,000 and $50,000, huh?
Yes.
That's pretty good. We're going to keep it at the Parkman House and show the public what a beautiful painting we have.
It's a great gift to the city. Thank you for bringing it in.
Thank you.
It's by Mary Elizabeth Price. This painting hung in my grandmother's living room. And I always told her how much I loved it, and she promised me I could have it. And so when she passed away, it became mine, and it now hangs in my living room. My grandmother was a student of hers, and she actually took painting lessons from Mary Elizabeth Price. And
How
so
wonderful.
I don't know how my grandmother came to acquire this. I don't know if it was a gift or if she purchased it.
Some paintings remain in a family because they are loved. This one remains unforgettable because it also captures the very heart of Mary Elizabeth Price. Best known for her decorative floral panels, Price built her reputation on paintings that turn flowers into something almost theatrical, set against glowing grounds of gold and silver leaf. She worked within the artistic world of New Hope, Pennsylvania, and her floral panels became the most recognizable part of her career, especially from the late 1920s into the 1930s. That is exactly why this painting feels so important. The subject is white mallow, also called marshmallow, one of the garden flowers that fit naturally into Price's favorite imagery. Painted likely in the 1930s, it has the flat screen-like design collectors most want from her work, along with the luminous metallic background that gives her panels their special glow. Rather than building deep space, Price let silhouette pattern and shimmer create the effect, which is what makes the painting feel both intimate and decorative at once. Her strong connection to the New Hope School is deepened by family ties as well, since her brother R. Moore Price was a noted frame maker for New Hope artists. Seen together, all of these qualities make the picture not just beautiful, but a highly characteristic example of Mary Elizabeth Price at her best.
You put all that together, and you end up with a picture that's worth at auction about $40,000 to $60,000.
Really?
Really.
Oh my God.
Way better than what you were thinking.
Wow. Okay. Thank you.
Well done. Thank you so much for bringing it. It's a beautiful example of her work.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow. Wow. It's time to up the homeowner's insurance.
We bought a painting that we purchased back in 1986. The artist we're now known is Lila Cabot Perry.
You both seem quite young to be collecting art in 1986. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, even as young children, our grandmother and our parents have always taught us to appreciate older things and paintings in particular. Even when we were little kids in diapers, we would go to museums and we would take trips on Saturday mornings to go yard sales to find little treasures.
Some paintings are chosen by instinct long before history explains why. This portrait by Lila Cabot Perry is one of those rare works. Bought simply because of its charm, it now stands as the work of one of the key American women painters who helped bring French Impressionism into the United States. Born in Boston in 1848, Perry spent important summers in Giverny, near Claude Monet, absorbed his ideas about light and color, and became one of the earliest American artists to carry that influence home. What makes this painting especially appealing is that it is both intimate and historically important. The sitter has been identified as Edith Agnes Grew, Perry's granddaughter shown with her doll Caroline. Since Edith was born in 1909, and appears to be a small child here, the painting is generally placed around 1915. Perry's major portraits were typically done in oil on canvas, and this one turns a family subject into something far more refined than a simple domestic likeness. The gentle pose, soft expression, and quiet presence of the doll show Perry's gift for blending Impressionist sensitivity with the warmth of American portraiture. That is why this picture feels so special. It is not just a charming image of a little girl. It is a deeply personal work by an artist who stood at the meeting point of Boston culture, French Impressionism, and American painting.
I would say a current auction estimate for this painting would be at least $40,000 to $60,000.
Wow. Really?
And I would say that's conservative.
Unfortunately, I know very little about the painting. You asked me earlier if I even looked up the artist. I didn't bother because it's not one of my favorites, but I bought it through an estate where I grew up in that town, and the lady had a bunch of paintings, and she was going into a care facility. So my mom called and said, why don't you come down and see what we can get? And that's the story.
Some pictures wait in silence until someone finally learns how to see them. This one spent years tucked away in a closet and then half hidden in an upstairs hallway. Yet it turns out to be a refined Paris scene by Alson S. Clark, likely painted in 1908. Born in Chicago in 1876, Clark came from a wealthy family, studied in the United States, then continued his training in Paris, including a period connected to James McNeill Whistler's circle. He lived and worked in Europe on and off until about 1914, and those years shaped the light-filled Impressionist style that became his signature. What makes this painting so appealing is its easy grace. The scene appears to show a bright summer day in a Paris garden, Possibly the Tuileries, though that identification remains careful rather than certain. Clark's real gift lies in atmosphere. He turns a simple outdoor setting into something airy, polished, and alive with light. Painted in oil on canvas, the work belongs to the same Paris period that formed much of his mature style before he later became widely known for paintings tied to the Panama Canal. That is why the picture matters more than its modest family story first suggests. It is not just a pleasant garden view rescued from storage. It is a graceful early work by an American impressionist whose eye for travel, leisure, and light was already fully awake.
Today at auction, conservatively in the realm of $30,000 to $50,000.
You are kidding me. That's incredible. 30 to... Oh my. So, I don't know what to say. I'm stunned. I guess I like it a lot more now. It'll have a place of honor from now on.
I brought to you a painting by Zelda Fitzgerald. She painted this while she was a patient in Johns Hopkins Hospital in the 1930s. And she painted this picture for a doctor who was the psychiatrist in charge of the Johns Hopkins Hospital. I inherited it from the doctor.
Well, this is a very interesting painting by Zelda Fitzgerald. Most people remember her primarily as the wife of F. Scott Fitzgerald, and together they became one of the most iconic couples of the 1920s jazz age. However, Zelda was also an artist in her own right, and during the 1930s, while undergoing treatment for mental illness at Johns Hopkins Hospital, she devoted a great deal of time to painting as part of her therapy. This particular work appears to be an oil painting on canvas created during that period. The composition and expressive style reflect the influence of European modernist painters that Zelda encountered during the years she spent traveling through Europe with her husband. Many of her paintings from this time were not produced for commercial sale, but were instead given as personal gifts, which explains why examples of her artwork rarely appear on the open market today. From a condition standpoint, the painting appears to be in reasonably good shape and is housed in a frame that likely dates to the same general period. What makes this piece especially compelling is the documented provenance connecting it to the psychiatrist who treated her at Johns Hopkins. Because works by Zelda Fitzgerald are relatively scarce and often undocumented, such supporting evidence is extremely important when considering authenticity. That was a long time ago. Markets change, interest changes. In today's market, a conservative auction estimate on this painting would be between $10,000 and $15,000. And I think for you to insure it, you should be thinking about perhaps $20,000.
Well, that's very nice. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm very excited. I got chills when you told me what you had in that box.